begin, let me open up in prayer and we'll dive into the book of Exodus. Lord, we're so grateful to you for your kindness to us. Thank you for the week of Thanksgiving that we had last week, where we can just pause and think about your provision for us, your care for us, and your grace upon us, and be thankful for those things. Lord, I pray that our hearts all week long were oriented toward thankfulness to you for the good gifts that you give. And now, Lord, we turn in thankfulness to your word and ask that you would teach us from it and give us your spirit so that we might learn and understand. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so in this adult Bible class, you've been working through the book of Genesis and specifically God's interactions with the patriarchs as of late. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And at the very end of Genesis, we've seen that God's sovereign hand and his gracious provision, and the fact that Jacob and his family have been able to relocate to Egypt to escape the famine. Okay, so if Jacob's family were to stay in Israel, in that land there, they most certainly would have died due to the famine. But through God's providence, and even in spite of Jacob's 11 sons' evil toward maybe 10 of them, Benjamin probably doesn't count as much, but the older brother's evil toward Joseph gets sold into slavery, and through God's providence becomes basically the second in command in all of Egypt. And when that famine hits and Jacob's sons have to go to Egypt to buy food, they run into none other than their brother, whom they sold into slavery. And so Joseph runs them through those series of tests to see where their brothers are at spiritually, if they have changed from, or repented, turned from the evil that they once engaged in, and so he tests them. And then at the end of the book of Genesis, Jacob reveals, I'm going to make that mistake all day today. I'm going to say Jacob when I mean Joseph, right? Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, and what was his brothers' response to the revelation of who Joseph was? They were afraid. Yeah, they were in fear because they had treated Joseph so poorly and wanted him dead and sold him into slavery. They naturally would fear reprisal, and that Joseph would have them killed because of their maliciousness toward him. But Joseph is a godly man and recognizes God's providence in all that he had been through, and how God had put him in this position now, as the end of Genesis says, to save many people alive. And you have that great summary statement at the end of Genesis 50:20. You intended it for evil. Every intention every action had behind it, it's this intention for evil. But all of your actions, God sovereignly worked and intended for good. And so God is not responsible for evil, but he does certainly control it. And in the end, his plan will work out, and many people will be saved alive. So not only did Joseph's wisdom save many people in Israel, but it preserved his own family. God put him in this position so that his covenant promise to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob would not fall short, and he would make good on that promise. And so Joseph's in this position to save his own family. And so what he does is he says, you know what, go get your father, go get our father, bring them all down to Egypt, and we'll settle you in the land of Goshen, and you can live there. We'll take care of you. So that's how the book of Genesis ends. And then, as we transition into Exodus, all right, Genesis ends and it moves right into the book of Exodus. You have in chapter 1 of Exodus a genealogy of sorts. And again, we're resetting with the family of Joseph. And so then, we're maintaining that connection with Genesis. And then look at verse 8 of chapter 1. It says, "Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, 'Behold, the people of Israel are too many, and too mighty for us. Let's deal shrewdly with them.'" Okay, so now there's a new king in Egypt. He doesn't know Joseph. He doesn't remember the relationship that Joseph had with the previous Pharaoh. And he looks out into Goshen and sees this nation, essentially, forming in the people of Israel. And they're becoming too many and too mighty. And so he has a fear for them. And so the solution for this problem that he's created, and again, we don't get any indication that Israel has been any trouble for Egypt at all. But yet, out of fear of what may be or what might be, the Pharaoh responds by enslaving all of the Israelites and making them work under slavish conditions to build Egypt. And that is the context in which Moses is born and grows up. And I think most of us in here this morning are familiar with the story of Moses, how there was an edict that the Hebrew babies should be put to death, and so Moses' mom hides him in the reeds, and Pharaoh's daughter finds him there, and then kind of takes him into the household and all of that. Moses grows up in Pharaoh's household, but at approximately the age of 40-ish or so, he decides that he wants to identify with the people of God and not with the people of Egypt, and he flees. He leaves, and so that is then where we come to in chapter 3 of the book of Exodus. And chapter 3 opens up with Moses keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he's out on the west side of the wilderness, and he comes to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. And in verse 2, look at verse 2 of chapter 3. It says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, 'I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned.' And when Moses saw that when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, 'Moses, Moses.' And he said, 'Here I am.' And he said, 'Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you're standing is holy ground.' And he said, 'I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob.' And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God." What we see here is, again, God's grace in action. What Moses knows of God is uncertain at this point. Obviously, he doesn't know him on these sorts of terms. And so when you read these first 3 verses, one of the first things that you see is God's work in drawing people to himself. Right? So I think that we can say that God draws us though we're not looking for him. So does it say that Moses was out on the west side of the wilderness near Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, and he was searching for God. He was looking for him, hoping to find him, perhaps coming upon this burning bush where God's presence would be revealed to him. That's not the case at all, obviously. Moses is out there just tending some sheep, his flocks, his father-in-law's flock, minding his own business, doing shepherdy stuff. And God draws him, God appears to him, even though Moses wasn't looking for him. But then look at verses 4 through 9. It says, "Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." So God has drawn Moses by bringing him into this burning bush scenario, even though Moses isn't looking for him. And then God reveals himself out of the burning bush. He says, "I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Now, the question is, does God have to reveal himself to people? Of course not. So you've got the grace of him drawing Moses to himself, and then the grace of him revealing himself to Moses, even though he doesn't have to do that. But God is gracious. But then, in so God talks about this situation, right, of his people in Egypt. They're under oppression, they're in slavery, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And then in verses 10 through 12, we see that God is going to call Moses. He says in verse 10, "Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." And Moses says, "Right on, God. I'm on board with that plan." Right? Whoops. Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" So God calls even though we are weak and we can do nothing without him. Look at what he says. Look at how God responds to that. In verse 12, he said, "I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will serve God on this mountain." Okay? So God draws Moses to himself. He reveals himself to Moses. He calls him then. "Moses, you're going to be the guy. You're going to lead my people out of Egypt." And Moses is like, "Whoa, I don't know if I can do this." But God can use him, though he's weak. Why? Because God promises that he will be with him, that he will give him the strength to do all that he's called him to do. And then, in the rest of this chapter, Moses is going to converse with God. And God is going to, again, reveal himself to Moses by revealing his name. And this is such an interesting passage because from all the information that we have, it looks like God has never named himself up to this point. So going through, the entire book of Genesis all the way up to the beginning of Exodus here. So when God reveals himself to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob, and they've got the covenant, it doesn't seem like God has a name like in the way that you would think the Canaanites gods have names, like Baal or Molech or something like that. But here God reveals his name to Moses. So Moses said to God, look at verse 13, "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say to this people of Israel, I am has sent you. And God said to Moses, say to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. And this is my name forever. And thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and of Jacob has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice. And you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. And now please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. And after that, he will let you go. And I will give this people forever in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty, but each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house, for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. And you shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, and so you shall plunder the Egyptians. So God reveals his name. Moses can't quite understand him, and so God goes on to explain himself, not just in terms of his name, I am who I am, but also what he will do by giving a promise to Moses and a promise to Israel that he's going to bring them up out of the land of Egypt. And so when you have the context now of Moses' calling, like God has revealed himself specifically to Moses to do a specific job, to be the leader of his people. Look at how Moses first responds. Okay? So look at verse 13 again. And tell me what you think of that sort of response. Good, bad, otherwise. What do you think? Okay? Yeah. And he's looking for identification. Like, so if I walk into Israel and say, you know, God Elohim has sent me, how am I going to know? How are the people going to know, you know, who we're talking about? You know, whether this is legitimate or not. Okay, so not a terrible start to the conversation. Okay, sometimes when we're commissioned with a task, we need more information. Right, we're not sure how to accomplish it. You know, on what authority am I going to do this kind of thing? And so, okay, let's say, all right, Moses just needs a little bit more information. A little bit skeptical, but okay. So God tells him his name. This is what you're going to tell the people of Israel. You're going to gather the elders together. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to show my mighty hand. And this is going to happen. Like, after Pharaoh denies you, and then I work my mighty wonders in the land of Egypt, then he's going to let you go, and you're going to leave. By the way, you're going to plunder Egypt without pulling a sword out, right? Without one fight, without throwing a punch. Okay? So now, is Moses on board with this plan? Speaking to God in this burning bush. Look at chapter 4 now. Look at chapter 4. Moses then answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. And the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? And he said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. And so he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. Probably I would do the same thing too. If like a snake, just appears, like I'm out of here. Oh, just crazy. But then the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put out his hand and he caught it, and it became a staff in his hand, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. Okay, so Moses, a little skeptical at first, asks for confirmation. But what would you call Moses' response now in chapter 4, verse 1? When he says, what if they won't believe me and will not obey me? Actually, in verse 1 he says, behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice. Right? They'll say the Lord did not appear to you. What do you call that? You could call it an excuse. Right? Now I would call it an excuse. An excuse before, that was nothing. But now we would call it an excuse. All right, so we've got excuse number 1. They won't believe. All right, so how does God respond to that? Right? You got this staff, and it becomes a serpent. And then back again, right? So God meets Moses' excuse. They won't believe me. I mean, I've got no credibility here. They'll just think that I was out in the wilderness too long, been in the sun too long, been out in the elements too long. I'm hearing voices. I'm seeing burning bushes that never are consumed. And they're just saying, dude, you're crazy, Moses. You're crazy. It's possible, too, that the people of Israel know Moses already, and that he was in Pharaoh's house, and that he had killed the Egyptian taskmaster, and all of this, and he's been gone for 20 years, and now he shows up again. This is all weird. So Moses is like, nah, they're not gonna believe. They're not gonna believe it. But then God says, He gives them this demonstration of his power, and says, "Yeah, this is now is God like doing some sort of magic trick in this case?" He's not doing magic just for magic's sake. Okay, he's not doing magic. I mean, God is the sovereign power of the universe. He can make these things happen. So this isn't just a magic trick for magic trick's sake. This is a sign of the authenticity of his message. And so what he's confirming to Moses is that, I'm gonna do something special that will give the people that you're gonna go talk to confidence that you in fact have spoken with me and have been commissioned to this task. And so you've got this staff turning to a serpent. Now, we again are probably familiar with this story and what's coming next. And so Moses is going to appear before Pharaoh. He's going to drop down his staff and it's going to turn to a serpent, right? And he's going to take it back up again. But what is Pharaoh's response to that sign? Yeah, Pharaoh's like, my magicians can do that. So he calls them in and they drop their staffs down and turn them into serpents. Okay, so now you have all these snakes running around and, Pharaoh's court or throne or whatever. But what sign then happens that validates what Moses is saying is true? Yeah. Moses' staffy serpent starts eating the other two for lunch or breakfast, whatever time they came in, right? All right, so this is not just, cool magic. These are undeniable signs of the truth to validate the message. And again, we see this all over the New Testament too. That's the reason why Jesus did so many signs. He's validating his message. That's why for a time he gave the apostles and some opportunities to do some miraculous things to validate their message. Okay? So God meets Moses' excuse, like, they're not going to believe me. He meets it with his power. I'll make sure that people understand who you represent. And so he takes care of that. So Moses is like, okay, now I'm on board. Right? No, he's not. All right, let's read verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, "Oh, my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue." Then the Lord said to him, "Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak." Okay, so what's the excuse now? Yeah. I'm not eloquent. I don't speak good. Okay? Never mind the whole staff to serpent to staff thing. Never mind that miraculous sign. I'm not eloquent. So here we have another excuse. Now, sometimes excuses parade as humility. You agree with that? Sometimes excuses parade as humility. So you could think of it in this way. Oh, Lord, no. I'm just not an eloquent speaker. I'm just a nobody. I'm, here in the wilderness with these sheep. I can talk to these sheep, but that's about it. Put me in front of people, I'm a mess. I'm a wreck. Okay. I just can't do this. Okay. That may sound like humility, and a lot of times we can mask excuses with humility, okay? Or make it sound like we're being humble. When in reality we're just looking for a way to be disobedient. And so we really have to be careful of that, because to misunderstand God's sufficiency and his power is a sin, right? And to not do what he's called us to do or commanded us to do because of these excuses is a sinful behavior. And we can mask that with, I'm not good enough. I just can't do that. So we have to be careful. We have to be careful about that. Yes. Okay. Well, maybe he had the training, and that's entirely possible because he would have been open to all the resources, the education of Egypt and whatnot. But training without skill, and if you've got a legit issue, then you can have all the training of the world, and it's not going to make that much of a difference. And so I think the way that God responds to his excuse there, I'm not eloquent, I can't speak. He says, I made your mouth. God's power is in the fact that he's the creator, right? And if he made Moses' mouth with that speech impediment or whatever, certainly if he's going to call him to do a task, he can overcome that. He can overcome that issue. And so I'll go with both of them, I guess, if that's a way that I can play both sides of the issue. Yeah. Yeah. You would think. Yeah. Yeah, if God is appearing to you in a burning bush and telling you these things, that's high on the level of credibility, Yeah. 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 I think we get a glimpse into the human heart too, right? Yeah. It gets worse here in a second. We're going to get there. Yeah, so again, were it not for the grace of God, overcoming all of our fears and overcoming all of our excuses, we would just continue in our sin. Let's think about this for a second. Let's think about it, by way of contrast. You remember Isaiah 6? Isaiah 6, like 1 through 6 or so. Isaiah is captured, given a vision of the throne room of God, right? And he sees the train of God's robe like smoke. It fills the throne room, and he sees the seraphim saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God, who was and is to come." So you've got this magnificent, powerful scene. And the Lord says, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" What's Isaiah's response in that situation? Yeah. So there's a problem. I'm a man of unclean lips, right? I'm completely falling apart. So Isaiah, when confronted with the holiness of God, his sinfulness is like put on display. It's like you can't hide it. And he's like, he just falls apart. And so you have this picture of this coal coming off and the angel touching his lips. It's a symbol of atonement. Isaiah's sins are being removed. Okay. And then what does he say? "Here am I, send me." Yeah. Yeah. You see the contrast between what God is doing or what Moses is doing here and what Isaiah, his attitude was? Same God, different responses. Okay, one is excuses, and one is like, okay, here am I, send me. It's a volunteer thing. All right, so Moses is like, they're not going to believe me. I'll give them a sign so that they will. I'm not that eloquent, bro. I made your mouth. I can overcome that. And just for some moral support, God says, I'm going to give you Aaron. All right, Aaron can speak. Aaron is apparently an accomplished orator. And so I'll tell you what to say, work it out with Aaron, and he'll go with you. He'll be your mouthpiece of sorts. Okay, so God is graciously working with Moses a little bit. Okay, now Moses is on board, right? Whew. He's worked through all of these excuses. Basically, these are born of fear, right? He's afraid of other people. Now, where's he at? Look at verse 13. Where am I at? Oh, there it is. But he said, "Oh, my Lord, please send someone else." Whoops. So, God has been gracious to him up at this point and has overcome his excuses. But now we have descended from excuses into refusal. Okay, this is a problem. He's defying God's call now. He says, find someone else. Well, how does God respond? How does God respond to that? The anger, verse 14, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, "Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he's coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and I will teach you both what to do, and he will speak for you with his mouth. He will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And take in your hand this staff with which you shall do the signs." Okay, so we've gone from excuses to refusal, and that refusal is what kindles the anger of God. But God is still gracious. I mean, he doesn't light Moses up, turn him into a crisp. He gives him Aaron. And so then Aaron is going to be, this mouthpiece of sorts. So let me ask this question. What is the difference between reasons and excuses? Okay, so let's think about what God has called us to do in the world. Generally speaking, we can look at the New Testament. We can look into examples in the Old Testament like Moses and whatnot. But when we look at the New Testament, we see the call of God on the believer. And he has revealed in the New Testament what we are supposed to be doing as individual believers and as a church. But then we look at places like 1 Corinthians 12, like Romans 12. People got different gifts. They got different strengths and abilities. What is the difference between a reason and an excuse as to why you can't do something for the Lord, to serve him in a certain way? Okay? Explain. Mm-hmm. Okay. Don't anticipate ever being able to use that reason.
That's how I remember it. I'm sure it wasn't quite that hard.
you get a pass. That's a reason, right? That's a reason why you didn't go to church. It's not an excuse. That's legit. That's legit. Very good. What else? How do we differentiate between reasons and excuses? Okay. Okay. Hmm. Right. Yeah. Right on. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the major factors is the call. The call in itself, like called to do, I feel like I'm called to do something. That's a little bit tricky in and of itself because, we can convince ourselves that God is calling us to do such and such when it is questionable whether or not that's the case. But if God does give you a desire for something and you've got the opportunity to do it, He presents you with the opportunity, and He has equipped you with the ability to accomplish whatever it is that He's calling you to, or whatever it is that you want to do. I think those are the pieces that we put together that constitute a call of sorts. And then when He calls us to a certain thing, He's given us the ability to do it, right? He doesn't call us to something that He doesn't equip us to do. Okay? And so, like if there's a particular area or manner of service that you're just not equipped for, or you don't have the opportunity for, those are reasons. Those aren't excuses. Okay? So, we might say that, you think about the call to be a pastor or something like that. Let's use that one. Right? A reason why you might not be a pastor is because you're a woman. 1 Timothy 3, puts some pretty special, significant qualifications on that. And so that is a reason why you're not called to do that particular ministry. Okay? That's not an excuse. Okay? So I think we're beginning to see the differences between the two. Moses is making excuses here. He's not giving legitimate reasons for why he can't do what God is calling him to do. So this is where we really have to look at our level of engagement in the church and look at our level of engagement as far as our service to God is concerned and evaluate. Am I giving reasons? Are there reasons why I can't do such and such or whatever, even though I've got the opportunity and I've got the ability, the capability? Or am I just making excuses because I'm fearful? Okay? Because what these fearful excuses are going to lead to is outright defiance. And that's where the anger of God can be kindled. And I think that's the pattern that the way that we're seeing things play out in Moses' life. Even so, we're human, right? So let's say that we've got a desire, an ability, opportunity. God has placed a call of sorts on our lives. Does that mean we're going to be 100% exceptional at whatever it is that He's called us to do? I think we're still going to be weak. Right? Was Moses perfect in his leadership? of the nation of Israel, he had some struggles. He had some struggles. So how do we think about that? How do we think about doing what God has called us to do in terms of our own weaknesses? What is God trying to just show us through that? Yeah, right? So probably one of the passages that comes to mind is Paul, in his thorn in the flesh. And he asked God to remove it 3 times. What was God's response to him in regard to that? Yeah, my grace is sufficient for you. And my power is made known in your weakness, essentially. I'm paraphrasing. That's the CSV, the Chris Standard Version of that. Right? My strength is made my strength is shown, made known in your weakness. So, does God call weak people to serve him? You better believe it. But it's through those weaknesses that his power is displayed. Right? Because he gives the strength, he gives us all the necessary resources that we need to accomplish what he's called us to do. And so we can have confidence in that. I think there's another qualifying factor, if we want to call it that. For as much as we see God's power that they overwhelm our excuses, that doesn't mean that we don't prepare and work hard to develop our skills and refine our abilities to keep working at things. It's not that we just take this attitude that, oh, God is just going to equip me and it's just going to magically happen and I'm going to do things. There's still a responsibility that we have to take the resources that God has given us and use them efficiently, to work at them. All right. One of the things that Paul commissioned Timothy or encouraged Timothy with was to work hard at what he was doing. And in doing so, and the reason why he wanted him to do that, or the purpose for that, was so that everyone could see his progress. Okay, so it wasn't as if Timothy was just there like a wet noodle, waiting for God to do, miraculous things through him or powerful things through him. Paul's like, no, get after it. Get to work. Refine your skills. Let people see you progress as a pastor for that church. And so that's another counterbalance to this whole thing. So make sure that we're staying in the middle of the road and not falling on either side of the ditches. Okay? God's power overcomes our excuses. If he calls us to something, he's going to equip us to do it. But at the same time, we're working at refining the skills, the resources that he's given us so that we can be effective in the ministry in which he's given us. And as each one of us does our thing, the church is functioning well. It's going to function well. And we're going to make an impact in God's time and in his way. Any other final questions before we wrap it up? Okay, you all are going to be volunteering for all kinds of stuff now. No excuses, right? All right, let me close in prayer. Lord, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for all that you have done in Moses' life that serves as an example to us that you're a powerful God and you can do some great things through us too, according to your will and plan. And we are just instruments in your hands. Your strength is shown in our weakness. And so, Lord, I just pray that you would just help us to rest in that and just be willing to do whatever it is that you've called us to do and trust that you'll accomplish it for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.